So let's see if I can get this. All right. And I'm going to do some screen sharing here. There we go. So everybody, can you see the slideshow?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to try to do this in 30 minutes so that there's plenty of time for questions. And I understand from Pat that you might want to go through your consensus question right away after, and I'm happy to stay for that as well. So without any further ado, let's plow right into this. And let me tell you what we're going to go over. The first thing is going to be the background of why we're even doing this study. We're going to touch very briefly on the League's affordable housing position, our study focus area, which is renter households at 50% of area median income and below. That's very low income. The needs of that population, and then talk solutions, both current and potential resources, and policy and law solutions as well. So first of all, why study affordable housing? So how did this all come about? Well, the Richmond League started, and I'm from Richmond, and I'm involved with the Richmond League. We started an affordable housing committee in early 2018. And one of the first things we did was read the Matthew Desmond book, Evicted, which if you haven't read it, is a very compelling, but it's pretty depressing book. And it tells the stories about individuals and families going through evictions, as well as the landlords doing the evicting. So Desmond received the Pulitzer Prize for this award, as well as for this book, as well as the MacArthur Award, which enabled him to start the nation's first ever eviction lab, which contains millions of data sets on evictions across the United States. And the initial phase of the lab was completed in the spring of 2018. And at that time, the New York Times published an article which thrust the city of Richmond in the national spotlight, because it showed that the city of Richmond had the second highest eviction rates in the nation. So we're going to talk more about evictions in a few minutes. So the Richmond League decided that it wanted to really focus its efforts on renters, and especially renters at very low income, but it also wanted to do some advocacy, not only at the local level, but that state level as well. And what we found out was that we couldn't really do it because the state league does not have an official affordable housing position. So we asked the state league to undertake a study, a 2-year study, which was approved last year at the 2019 convention, to be completed at next year's and presented at next year's convention. So we started that last year, and here's a list of the committee members. And we've been meeting monthly to really look at the affordable housing needs and solutions. And we completed a report several months ago, and this presentation really is a summary of that report. But I did want to mention that all of our resources not only are in the report, but they're also on the State League's website. There's a member section portal, and in that is our housing study, and you can see all of the information from the study in that portal. So why is affordable housing important to start with? So housing is a basic human need. You all know that's like food and clothing. If your housing isn't affordable, it's going to negatively impact your ability to pay all your other costs, because housing is one of your the largest costs in a household. It's also going to be, if your housing is a poor quality, it's going to negatively impact your health as well as your safety. And I might add, if you're living in overcrowded conditions, such as many people in Black and Brown communities, you are really going to be at high risk during this pandemic. Finally, if you're evicted often and you have frequent moves, it's not only going to impact you, but it's going to negatively impact your children's ability to learn. So there's a very good website and a good organization called Housing Virginia. And they have very good studies that they've done on the connection between housing and health and housing and education. And that can be found at housingvirginia.org. We took a lot of information from our study from this particular website. So like I said, I'm not going to go into the position. Suffice it to say that the State League, while it mentions affordable housing in the behavioral health position, it does not have an official position on affordable housing. So the focus of our study, as I said, is renter households with incomes at or below 50% of the area median income. And for a household of one, the maximum income is $31,000. This focus area is also going to include people who are homeless, because they obviously need very affordable rental housing. And the next few slides are really going to tell you why we are focusing our attention on this population, because this is the population who really needs advocacy and efforts more than any other. The definition of affordable housing, or this kind of standard for affordable housing, is it's affordable if it does not consume more than 30% of meaning rent and utilities, don't consume any more than 30% of your monthly income. If your housing consumes more than 30% of your monthly income, you are considered housing cost burden. In Virginia, 87% of extremely low income renter households, that means households whose income is at 30% of area median income, which equates to $18,000. That's the maximum income for that income range. So 80% of those people cannot, their housing is unaffordable, and they're considered housing cost burden. 81% of very low income people, those between 31 and 50%, are considered housing cost burden. If you pay more than 50% of your income on housing, you are considered severely cost burden. In Virginia, 70% of extremely low income renter households are considered severely cost burden, and 33% of very low income renters are considered severely cost burden. This is just a depiction of what I just talked about, with the blue bar being those that are cost burden and the red being those that are severely cost burden, and it's by income. So the lower your income, the higher the cost burden. The higher your income, the lower the cost burden. And the cost burden varies around the state. So the highest severe cost burden is for extremely low income households is in Northern Virginia. So the state's average is 70%. In Northern Virginia, it's 76%. And the highest severe cost burden for households between 31 and 50% of area median income is in Hampton Roads. So the National Low Income Housing Coalition is the premier national organization. They're a nonprofit, and they do excellent research and education and training and advocacy. They publish what's called their gap report, which shows the gap or the shortage of rental housing nationwide. So in Virginia, for extremely low income renters, there are only 36 affordable and available housing units for every 100 extremely low income renters. That equates to a deficit of over 157,000 rental units. For people between 31 and 50%, that's not on the slide, there's only 57 affordable and available rental units for every 100 extremely low income renters, which equates to a deficit of 177 rental units. The largest gap in affordable and available rental units is in Northern Virginia. There's only 28 housing units available for every 100 extremely low income renters. And for rural areas, that gap is generally about 49. This is just a depiction of that gap. So the blue part of the bar are units that are available for extremely low income renters, and the red are those that are needed. So you'll see that all the way to the right is Northern Virginia. In the middle is Hampton Roads, and Richmond is on the left-hand side. Now we're going to talk about fair market rents. And the reason that we're talking about them and explaining them is because of the next slide. Fair market rents are determined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development annually because they administer the federal Housing Choice Voucher Program. That program used to be called Section 8. You might remember it as that. And that's where renters, very low income renters, can receive a housing subsidy. They only have to pay 30% of their monthly income, and the remainder is paid by HUD. The average fair market rent in Virginia is a little over $1,000, but this is a sample of fair market rents across Virginia. And these are for one bedrooms. You'll notice that the highest fair market rent, as you can well imagine, is in Northern Virginia and at $1,500 for a one bedroom, and the lowest are in the rural areas such as Franklin County at $544 a month. Charlottesville's fair market rent is in between those two. It's a little over $1,082 for a one bedroom. So in Virginia, 34% of households are renters. That equates to about 1 million households. If you are working at minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, and while the General Assembly changed that, it's actually, because of the pandemic, not going to be a fact until sometime in 2021. If you're working at minimum wage, you would have to work 109 hours a week or earn almost $43,000 to afford a one bedroom fair market rent. And here's examples of some wage earners who would not be able to afford a fair market rent. And you'll notice that many of those are some of the same households who are most at risk during the pandemic. Senior care providers, nursing assistants, cashiers, clerks, personal care aides, janitors, they wouldn't be able to afford a one bedroom fair market rent. Let's talk about homelessness. So while homelessness has decreased 36% over the past 10 years, there's still 5,800 people homeless on any given night. And that is determined by the point in time study that's done throughout actually the entire nation in every county and city. And in Virginia, it's compiled, the numbers are compiled by the Department of Housing and Community Development, and that's where this number comes from. 85% of people who are homeless are sheltered versus 15% who are unsheltered. That means that they're living in places not designed for human habitation. So we're talking about camps and park benches and under bridges and in abandoned buildings and cars. 85% of people who are homeless are single adults versus 15% are families. Virginia uses all of the best practice solutions to preventing and ending homelessness, including short-term shelter, getting people into permanent housing as quickly as possible once they become homeless, and permanent supportive housing, especially for people who are chronically homeless. The Department of Behavioral Health estimates that there's still a need for 5,000 permanent supportive housing units statewide for people who are seriously mentally ill. And in Richmond City alone, we know that there's a need for 300 PSH units for people who are chronically homeless. And now here's the statistics I was told you I was going to talk about in terms of the eviction rate in Matthew Desmond's eviction lab, which, by the way, is located at Princeton University. You'll notice that Virginia's eviction rate is over twice the national average at 5.12%. We have the dubious distinction of having 5 of the highest eviction cities, large cities in the US, with Richmond as at number 2. And the dubious distinction of having 3 of the top evicting mid-sized cities in the US, with the city of Petersburg at number 2 at over 17%. You'll notice that these are all clustered, these cities that are in bold are all clustered in the Hampton Roads area, the greater Richmond area, the Tri-Cities area of Petersburg and Petersburg-Hopewell. And, you know, we're continuing to do research about that, but some of the reasons are because these cities have this, the highest poverty rates in the state. They also have some of the oldest housing stock. And some of the other cities, especially like in Northern Virginia, have more robust eviction prevention programs. By the way, in case you're wondering, the eviction rate for the city of Charlottesville is 1.77%. So that's even lower than the national average of a little over 2%. So that's pretty good. So those are all the reasons why we really wanted to focus our efforts on people who are very low income and below, living in rental housing. So why do we have an affordable housing crisis? First of all, incomes just haven't kept pace with housing costs, especially in Northern Virginia. There's also a severe shortage of those federal rental subsidies, those housing choice vouchers I was talking about. There's also more demand for rental housing due to the foreclosure crisis that happened over 10 years ago, and millennials not able to afford homeownership, so they're staying in rental housing. So we have what's called a trickle down theory. What that means is that there are some higher income households that are paying less than 30% of their monthly income for rent, thereby taking up affordable housing that, you know, some very lower income people, you know, don't have access to. There's nothing we can do about it, but it is a phenomenon. There's also more demand in rural areas for rental housing, but there's just not been any appetite to develop it. Finally, and very importantly, it's just not economically feasible for housing developers to develop rental housing for very low and extremely low income households, because the rents that people can afford in these income brackets can afford don't pay for those operating and maintenance costs that developers have once they develop affordable housing. They can't do it unless they have subsidies and some kind of incentives, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So let's look at solutions, current resources and potential resources. First, let's look at what the state's role is. So again, just a reminder, this is a state study. So what role does the state have? The state actually provides financial resources, such as the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, which we're going to talk about in a minute. They also enact policies and laws, such as the statewide building code and landlord tenant act that affect everybody in the state. So for current resources, we're going to look at the Housing Trust Fund first. What is that? Housing trust funds provide gap financing that have very low or no interest loans to developers. Virginia is one of 47 states and the District of Columbia to have housing trust funds. Ours started in 2013. And since then, the Virginia Housing Trust Fund has funded over 3,000 housing units and 45 housing projects all across the state, including Charlottesville, using the $27 million that had been appropriated during that time. By the way, that actually leveraged over $750 million in other public and private resources. More than half of those units that were developed were for households at 50% of area median income and below. The current appropriation is 14 million, or the appropriation for that ended in June 30th is 14 million. We actually are pretty sure now, because the budget it has come out, that it will be about 55 million, which is huge, and a really good sign that we're moving in the right direction, and a good sign that there is a lot of faith and trust in the Housing Trust Fund, because it has done, such a good job across the state in creating affordable housing. The second solution are funds for homelessness. You might not know this, but Virginia has actually provided state funds for homelessness for over 30 years, and that number has just increased over the years. It's currently 14.2 million, and it goes through the Department of Housing and Community Development and is granted to over 80 organizations for all those best practice solutions I was talking about, including permanent supportive housing. So what is that? I talked about PSH, permanent supportive housing. It's an evidence-based approach model to housing that includes affordable housing, usually with rental subsidies, and wraparound, very intensive support services for people who have serious disabilities. So we're talking about people with chronic, serious mental illness and chronic substance use disorder and serious physical disabilities. For people who are in permanent supportive housing, there's a 95% success rate. That means 95% of people in PSH never return to homelessness. And I can attest to that, since I ran Virginia Supportive Housing for over 16 years. By the way, you have one of the permanent supportive housing buildings that we developed when I was there in Charlottesville. It's called The Crossings, but I mentioned that. And hopefully there's going to be another one developed by Virginia Supportive Housing. The third resource is permanent supportive housing for persons with serious mental illness. That's administered by the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. And it started in 2016. And the current appropriations is 17.8 million. And it's to help 1,200 households with rental subsidies. So they have to pay 30% of their income, and the rest comes from this money. And it's for people who are seriously mentally ill, either chronically homeless or discharged from state hospitals, or unstably housed and frequent users of systems such as hospitals. So again, it's subsidies. The support services are provided by the community services boards or private providers. The Department of Behavioral Health estimates that 90% of the people that they put into PSH remain stably housed. So permanent supportive housing is a very successful model. So we're going to talk about potential state solutions. The first is a state low-income housing tax credit. What's that? So it would be a companion to the federal low-income housing tax credit program. It's a very complicated program. I could do a whole week of training on it, but suffice it to say, I'm going to tell you about it in 2 seconds. So what it means is that investors in projects and housing projects, they receive federal tax credits. In return, they provide money or equity in a project. So, and by the way, this federal LIHTC is often combined with the Virginia Housing Trust Fund to provide additional subsidies so that developers can develop housing for even lower incomes people. So if we had a state credit, it would operate the same way, where developers in projects would give money or equity, and in return, they would get a state income tax credit. And ostensibly, it would provide a deeper subsidy so that we could help even lower income housing. households. By the way, the tax credit program and the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, they do help people at extremely low income, but not so much. It's usually between 30 and 50 or 60% of area median income. A state tax credit would help that. The good news is in the 2020 General Assembly, they passed HB 810, which asked the Department of Housing and Community Development to draft legislation, which they're actually in the process of doing for 2021 for a Virginia Housing Opportunity Tax Credit program. It would be like a state LIHTC. The second potential solution would be a state housing choice voucher program. And that would be it would be kind of like the federal program, but the federal program is very underfunded and oversubscribed. There are waiting lists at all the housing authorities around the state, including the one in Charlottesville. So this would, help fill that gap if we put state money, and it would be run very similar to that which the Department of Behavioral Health does, except theirs is specifically for people with serious mental illness. This would be for anybody with very low and extremely low incomes. The final potential solution, and actually this should now be put into the current solution because it is now, this money is going to be included in the state budget that will hopefully be passed. So we're going to talk about eviction, diversion, and prevention programs. What's the difference? So diversion programs usually occur only when a family receives a court filing paper, like an unlawful detainer, and then they're diverted from actually getting evicted then. Whereas prevention programs can intervene before someone actually gets court filings. As soon as someone's late in their rent, they can actually be prevented from eviction. Diversion programs, there was a diversion program pilot that was passed last year that started in July, but there was no money attached to it. But in the 2020 General Assembly, they approved $3.3 million state dollars that could be used both for eviction, diversion, and prevention programs. And that will be run through the Department of Housing and Community Development and could actually include money for support services as well. So we're going to talk for now at potential policy and legislative solutions. And I'm aware that we're running out of time, so I'm going to go very quickly. So the first is actually a bill that was passed in the General Assembly, HB 6, called the Source of Income. And what that is doing is it's requiring landlords to accept housing choice voucher holders. And we're including this because we don't, we want to make sure that if the different General Assembly comes in, that they don't undo this law. And what this says is landlords that have more than 4 units must accept a housing choice voucher holder if they meet the same rental criteria as all the other prospective tenants, and the housing authority approves their tenancy within 15 days. The second is policies incentivizing development. So one way to increase the supply of affordable housing is through inclusionary housing ordinances, such as inclusionary zoning and impact fees for affordable housing. These fall under the Dillon Rule, which require enabling legislation. Due to a statute passed by the General Assembly several years ago, 6 localities in Virginia, all but one in Northern Virginia, were able to pass mandatory inclusionary zoning ordinances that provide incentives to developers to add affordable housing units in their projects. These incentives include access to local housing funds, reduction in density requirements, and other kind of waivers of standard development requirements, such as parking fees. in the 2020 General Assembly, they actually passed a statute enabling any locality to pass a mandatory inclusionary zoning. So Charlottesville can now do that. Again, we included this to make sure that it doesn't get undone. Impact fees for affordable housing have not, it still needs enabling legislation. And that would be, there's impact fees that developers, localities can require for public education and infrastructure, but not for affordable housing. So the third policy relates to eviction laws and policies. So when all of this came down 2 years ago about Virginia having so many localities with very highest eviction rates in the nation, then we started looking at all of our laws and policies to see if they could be changed. We're kind of neutral in terms of, a state with middle of the road policies. So many evictions really negatively impact families, especially children. In Virginia, you can get evicted within as soon as 38 days. The average is usually later than that, but around 60 days. And most people are evicted in Virginia because of non-payment of rent, like 95% of them. So one law that was actually passed last year in 2019 was to require written leases. Before that, they weren't required. This year, two things were passed, which we're including in our consensus issues, one of which is a cap on late fees of 10%. And then the second is that your record can be expunged if your case has been dismissed. If you ask for it before this, you could never have been evicted and your case was dismissed, and it will always show up on your records. If we extend pay or quits, the time frame, because right now, if you're 5 days late, then you are going to get a late fee on charge, and it's going to start the whole eviction counting for an unlawful detainer. So the advocates thought that if we extended that pay or quit to more days, it would give people more time to pay their rent. Some recent information that I've sent out to the Affordable Housing Study Committee is that we found out after the study was written that the Virginia Poverty Law Center looked at all of the state's eviction laws and found that just an extended pay or quit isn't going to reduce evictions. But if you add to it the warranty of habitability as an affirmative defense and extended pay or quits, that will result in reduced evictions. So that I think the Poverty Law Center is now working on not only just extending the pay or quits, but having a warranty of habitability as an affirmative defense. So the impact of COVID, I talked, this is an older slide now because the budget hopefully will pass with money for all of these things. But one thing I do want to mention is that there's been an increase to the National Housing Trust Fund, which will result in $4.4 million to Virginia, which some of that money is targeted to extremely low income renter households. And of course, that $15 million was signed by the governor and is now being used for rent and mortgage assistance programs across the state. I don't know who in Charlottesville is running that program, but someone is. So that is pretty much it. I'm sorry I ran over, but I'm available to answer any questions that you might have about the presentation, and then we can talk about, Pat can go over the consensus questions. And I don't know if any of you put some questions in the chat box or not. So does anybody have any questions? You might be on mute.
Yeah, I was about to say, it looked like Rosalie had a question. Pat, you're on mute.
Thank you.
No,
I think Rosalie had a question.
presentation, that's all. I didn't have a question. I just wanted to say excellent presentation.
Good. So nobody has any questions?
It's like Geraldine does.
Geraldine,
Uh,
Jerry.
I kind of hate to break, I hesitate to break this up, but I saw a program on PBS about the opportunity zones
Mhm.
with the tax credits that people can invest and get tax credits.
Mhm.
They're supposed to be for low income housing, but the study they did said that there were very few people of low income that benefited from them, that they were usually placed in places near high income people, and the low income people didn't get much of a benefit, but the investors made a killing.
Yeah. I mean, the study group did not focus on those opportunity zones at all, mainly because it's a, federal program, even though it's being implemented, at the state and local level. But we felt the same way, and so we didn't focus on that at all. Affordable housing has so many parts and pieces to it. There's a lot of things you can focus on, and we decided to focus on renter households at very low incomes because we felt they needed our help the most.
I saw an article or a blurb put out by Sally Hudson talking about the need for the Dillon Act, removal of some of the, or working through the Dillon Act to enable communities to use the federal housing trust money in a way that's appropriate for those communities. You can't have one rule fits all for across the state. As you very clearly demonstrated, there's tremendous variation in incomes and housing costs all across the state. So one program that might be helpful in Franklin County would not pass mustard in Albemarle County. And so apparently she has a bill in pushing to address that.
Yeah, I would be interested in, is she talking about getting rid of the Dillon rule? Talking about a specific piece of legislation,
No, it's a specific piece of
like
legislation.
for impact fees or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly,
Because
exactly.
like Charlottesville right now, because this law was changed for this mandatory inclusionary zoning, and it's allowing all localities now to use mandatory inclusionary zoning. And so Charlottesville, this could be something you could do at the local level and ask them to pass an ordinance for mandatory inclusionary zoning.
Wow. Okay.
It's already in your hands. You already can do that.
So Thomas
Yeah.
wants to say.
The Albemarle County Board of Supervisors did that some
Yes.
years ago.
Yeah.
And,
Albemarle
it-
is one of those 6
it's long enough.
localities.
Yeah, it's been in effect long enough to show that it's not having real good impact on anything. But I would just like to let league members know that in the 1990s, our local league had a housing committee and was looking at these issues, particularly at the plight of the very low income, with the realization that the moderately low income people were the low-hanging fruit, the ones that you could actually get into dwelling units and feel good about yourself and what you had done, still leaving the lowest income people without resources. So this study sounds like it's definitely tackling the lowest, and I'm glad to see that. And our housing committee, I don't know, went on for over 5 years, I'm sure, but I'm not sure how long, but it was shocking to everyone at the time. By shocking, I mean, it was surprising to the public because they thought of the League as a group that was always speaking against development. And we were coming out in favor of some developments and projects. So we felt rather courageous at the time, but that was a long time ago. Thanks.
Francis Schutz has a question.
I don't. Well, the question is the moderator, Pat, is that you? Are you looking at your chat? Because there are 4 questions in there.
Oh, you know what? My attention is split in 5 different ways. So thank you for pointing that out. And Alice, let me read what's in the chat. Is the eviction ban still in effect here in this state?
No, although I did hear something just like within the last day or so that they're still talking about it. The General Assembly is still talking about it, but right now, the only moratorium on evictions is that CDC one, the federal one, that's going to expire at the end of December. And with that one, you have to have, the tenant has to make these declarations. First of all, the tenant needs to know about it. Secondly, they need to make these declarations and, show them to the landlord. That's the only one. There's not a state one right now. So just be looking at the news in terms of what the General Assembly passes, because there might be one coming.
Okay. A question from Karen Yates asking, is the tax credit, does that not apply to rental units, the tax credits?
I'm not quite sure. Are you talking about the federal low-income housing tax credit program and then the companion state low-income housing tax credit program? Is that whoever asked the question, is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about other tax credits?
I'm waiting for her to type in her thing into the chat box, her response.
Yeah, she typed yes, Pat.
Okay, that is, yes, that is for renters. That is for renters.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, it's just for renters.
Okay.
I mean, but it doesn't, so the money actually is for the developers, okay? And there's not any money that's appropriated. It's just that the state counts it as money because they would lose the money for state income tax coming in. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Beth Carriel, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. I was wondering for your study whether you, was kind of curious if you interviewed landlords, and one thing that came up during the pandemic with relief money for renters, and there's often this distinction between what they call mom and pop landlords and then landlords who own a lot of properties. And what happens with mom and pop landlords is that, of course, you don't want to evict a renter who can't pay their rent. But then the problem is when the landlord can't pay their mortgage. So I know during the pandemic, this came up a lot, the concern about what they call mom and pop, where maybe people have two small rental houses or whatnot. And if, of course, people don't want to evict people, but then if the owner can't pay their mortgage, so there needs to be, in my opinion, or my concern or question, is how do you help out the landlord who can't pay their mortgage if they're not getting their rent. Did you look into that or study that, or, you know?
Well, I mean, okay, so most laws that end up being passed in Virginia related to Landlord Tenant Act only apply to, you know, landlords who have four or more than 4 units. So you notice that housing choice voucher holder, the source of income that I was talking about, that only applies, that doesn't apply to the mom and pop ones. So it generally, that's how Virginia goes, right? They want to exclude the mom and pop ones. But that's not really what you're talking. You're talking about landlords.
No, that's what I'm
Okay.
talking about. That's what they do. But what I'm wondering about is what are your
Well, we did-
findings?
Yeah.
What are your findings and your evidence so that we can form, you know,
Yeah.
opinion on it? So like, would you agree with that kind of policy, or do you want to change that? Did you look into this?
Well, no. I mean, I think that, no, we're not, I don't know that we necessarily, we didn't deal with that particular aspect of mom and pop renter landlords versus the bigger landlords. But, you know, I talked to actually one of my sources was this guy that runs a property management company that deals with, you know, thousands of you know, units and many different kind of property owners and landlords, including mom and pop. And, you know, so we did get that particular aspect of it when we were looking at these policies. But I think the only one that I can tell you in terms of research is the one I mentioned at the very end, where, you know, when you look at every single state and their policies, you know, if we change these 2 laws, it would really reduce evictions. So that's really the only thing we looked at, but I'm not sure that's answering your question.
No, that answered a lot of it, but I'm still wondering how you would propose compensating I mean, the mom and pop ones are the ones who really don't have any extra money to pay their mortgage if someone's not paying their mortgage. So there's a real concern about the mom and pop ones. But even general, did you look into how do you compensate landlords when they're not getting their rent paid? I mean, you know, what is the mechanism for compensating landlords?
Well, I think that comes down to the whole putting some money in for eviction prevention programs. You know, whether we're in a pandemic or not, you need to have a pot of money, you know, unless we, you know, are paying people a living wage and people can afford their rents, right? You need to have a pot of money that's available when someone who's a very low income and below, who's living hand to mouth existence, doesn't have support systems, right? Doesn't have money saved up, and something happens, they have an emergency that occurs. So you need to have this pot of money available that someplace they can go to when things like this happen, so that they can get the money they need so that they can pay the rent. And actually the money would go to the landlord, not the tenant. These programs, the money just goes to the landlord, not the tenant. So that's kind of the way we looked at it. Okay. It's like, we're not trying to, you know, tenants need to pay their rent. Okay. That's the bottom line. They need to pay their rent. If they can't pay their rent, something's going on. You know, they're paying more than 30% of their income. They're paying more than 50% of their income, and they're living this hand to mouth existence. Something happens. You need to have some kind of, you know, life raft for them if an emergency occurs. So that's kind of the way we looked at it. Does that make sense?
Right. So you're saying that you're looking at that you would propose policies so that the tenant can pay their rent, as compared to having a separate policy that gives money to landlords.
Yeah, yeah,
Basically.
that, you
Okay,
can't do
gotcha.
it that way. Yeah, you can't,
Gotcha. Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
okay,
Thank you.
good.
And Bobby Williams.
Thank you. I thought I heard that Governor Northam was talking about helping benefit the landlord in that coming out of the CARES Act, that whether it's going to get, I don't know if it's budgeting or if he's just going to get presented to him, but if the tenant explains to them that they cannot pay their rent, then they are going to work with the landlord to get it compensated. And I don't know what this CARES
So
Act
the rent and mortgage program I was talking about, the CARES one,
uh-huh.
there's two aspects of that. The one is that you have a nonprofit or somebody in Charlottesville, in Albemarle, is running this program. I don't know who it is. I didn't look that up. But you all, and that's for tenants to apply. You know, tenants apply, they get, they actually don't get the money. The money goes to the landlord.
Landlord.
The other aspect of it is landlords can apply through the, used to be the Virginia Housing Development Authority. It's now called Virginia Housing.
Okay.
They can apply on behalf of their tenants to get money for, you know, that's missing, that hasn't been able to be paid. But I think they do have to get the tenant's permission, you know,
Okay.
to get this money. Okay.
This
But there's two ways that it can happen.
okay.
But either way, the money goes directly to the landlord to pay the rent.
Is there any way of knowing what the time lag would be? I mean, it is, as Becky says, desperate to pay your mortgage because the banks don't sit there and give you too much of a leeway on that. You know, I need to look into it because I've got the same situation going on right now. But
Yeah, look, you know, it's going to vary depending on where you live and who's running the program.
yeah, okay.
I can't really tell you. And there is a thing about mortgage holders. If you have been given a, oh my God, what's the term I'm thinking of? Like,
An extension.
not an extension, well, probably like an extension, you know, for paying it. You're not eligible for this program.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you haven't, if your mortgage holder hasn't been willing to give you an extension, you are eligible to get this money.
Oh, interesting.
But there's a lot of money still available. So yes, definitely. I'm sorry I didn't look at who's running the program in your area, but and I went on the Department of Housing and Community Development website and it wasn't there. It wasn't available.
Dave Norris would be our total resource. Dave Norris.
Yeah, ask Dave. He would know.
He is our resource.
Yeah, ask Dave.
Okay. So I'm wondering if we should begin our consensus questions.
I think so, because it's 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
I mean, 3 o'clock.
Yeah. The first question is, the state should utilize the following existing funding mechanism to preserve and create affordable housing. And on the list, they have the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, homelessness grants, permanent supportive housing through DBHDS, which is Alice,
Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services.
thank you. And the fourth component is eviction diversion and prevention programs. And the choice for the answers is agree, disagree, no consensus, or comments. So would anybody like to open up with a comment or agreement or a disagreement?
I certainly agree with that. That's a no-brainer.
Okay.
Pat, can I suggest that you, on your your share screen, you put up that PDF? I have it on my
With the study consensus?
the questions.
if you have it on yours, can you quickly share it? Because I
Yeah,
don't
let me
think,
see if I can do that.
oh,
Here it is. All right, did that show up, everybody?
there it is.
Okay.
Perfect.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, because of this, I cannot see everybody's face. So, if you have a question and you want to say something, I think you're going to have to jump in. So it looks like we have an agreement from Karen, agreement from Beth Cariel, an agreement from Elizabeth Franks.
I might recommend that you just see if there's anybody that disagrees,
Right.
because you
Thank
have
you.
a pretty big group.
Okay. If anyone disagrees, please note it in the chat box. Thank you.
The other thing you can do is in the participants, you can just click yes or no.
Okay. So I don't see any disagreement. So I presume that we agree with this statement and we'll proceed to the next question. The next question is the state should consider the creation of the following funding mechanism to preserve and create affordable housing. State low income housing tax credit program. And the second one is state housing choice vouchers. Do we have anyone who disagrees with those two proposals?
Karen Yates does not like credits, tax credits.
She said no on tax credit, yes on vouchers. Anyone else want to jump in on this?
That could go under comments, Pat, that there was one member that said no on tax credit and one on choice vouchers. That should be a comment.
Okay,
And this is only for people that are for anyone with over 4 units.
correct.
This does not include mom and pops.
No, okay, so that, I think you're mixing apples and oranges here.
Maybe.
Yeah, this is a funding mechanism that would be, for housing choice vouchers means that would be for renters with very low income and below. And the other is for creating additional housing that would help developers do it.
Right.
It doesn't relate to that question about mom and pop.
Okay.
There was one request that Karen Yates might share with why, her reason why she said no on a tax credit. And perhaps we can include that. Well, we'll see. We'll see if she's able to do.
She can send that in by email.
Yeah.
Karen, if you're there, you'll have to email to Pat your
Probably on her
comment
phone.
on this.
But are we having any discussion? Because I guess I would like to hear what Karen's reason is rather than just no.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if she's on the phone, and I don't know if she can.
Yeah,
Oh, that's.
And I don't know if she can get it typed in.
Oh, okay. Okay. I just think it's nice to share the reason
Right.
Of
so
course.
we can think about it since we're trying to reach consensus.
Yes. What I would like to do is look at the next question to give Karen time to perhaps get something typed into the chat screen in response to this. Okay, because Karen works on a complicated system from home. And so let me give her an extra minute to do this. The third question is the state should require that landlords accept housing choice vouchers that the households provided that they meet all the same rental criteria used with other tenants. And can
Yeah,
I presume from that that is not the law at this point?
No, that is the law.
Okay.
yeah, I'd like to say something about that. I'm on the local Human Rights Commission, and we look into discrimination issues, including housing discriminations. And we're very conscious of the fact we wrote into our bylaws or into the ordinance that source of funds should not be used to discriminate against anybody in housing. And source of funds refers directly to housing choice vouchers. And some way, my commission is very concerned about this. And if there is some legislation that would require landlords to ignore the fact that the source of funds is coming from the housing choice vouchers, we would be really, really happy with that.
Well, Sue, there, the law, the HB6 passed.
Yeah,
Yeah, so you can't do that now.
I know, but we're finding people coming to us
I see.
with discrimination. And so we're really, really in favor of this. Whether,
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah,
should the state require it? Oh, yeah.
yeah.
So Alice, would you say that might be, Alice and Sue, would you say that might be an enforcement issue?
Yeah, and there,
Oh, probably.
yes, the enforcement part of it is, left up to the tenant in organizations like Sue is talking about, or Housing Opportunities Made Equal, who does this, housing discrimination statewide. Yeah, they're the enforcement agencies.
Right.
But, that's just so typical. I mean, landlords are still discriminating against Black people.
Yeah.
I mean, there are lawsuits happening to this day.
Yeah, and that's what we are concerned with on the Human
Right,
Rights Commission.
right.
We're worried about discrimination, and yes, there are mechanisms within the Human Rights Commission
Yeah,
to take somebody, to
Yeah.
a hearing, et cetera, and that's the enforcement part of it.
yes, exactly.
We did get a response from Karen Yates about her reason for saying no on tax vouchers, but yes on, no on tax credit, but yes on choice vouchers. And Karen notes that a new article included a comment by Elaine Poon of the Legal Aid Justice Center that said one should be very careful about solving problems with tax credits. It's so complicated that it's really not very useful. It just sounded that vouchers were far and above better. That's what Karen shared with us in the chat
Yes.
box.
And
Okay.
I
Just to-
agree with that, and because we discovered when we did the education study, the one of the thorny points was using tax credits.
So, okay, so just to clarify or to make this a point, so these two funding sources are so different. So not sources, but the end result. So one is to help tenants pay their rent, right? That's one of them. It would be to help them pay their rent. That's the housing choice vouchers. The second is actually a bricks and mortar. So state tax credit, state low income housing tax credit program would be a bricks and mortar. It's to create additional affordable housing.
Yeah.
Or to preserve affordable housing that, is in danger of getting off the market. So they're totally different kinds of things, okay? But they're both ways of helping very low income renter households. So I just wanted to make, clear that you understood that.
So Alice, do you mean tax credits to builders?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly, yes, yes.
I
That-
think you do. And yes, and so Karen, do you still oppose it when Alice described it as tax credits to builders? So builders will want to build lower income housing because they are the ones who are given the tax credit.
So it's the tax credit is really the only, it's a subsidy for, really, that's what it ends up doing. It ends up enabling developers, and usually
Yes.
profit developers, actually serve a lower income population.
Yes.
Because then, it kind of gives more money into the project. Like,
Right.
let me just describe something. The crossings, okay?
Yes.
We use federal low income housing tax credits and Virginia Housing Trust Fund, and had to raise millions in private resources because tenants really can pay very little. And even though we have a subsidy for each unit, it's still not enough for the project to bear the cost. So that's just an example. That's one example.
I think it's really important because otherwise the builders don't have any reason to build low income units. I think it's very important to have the tax credits for the builders.
So it sounds like we're in agreement that we need both those components, and we are in agreement with the study's suggestion that both of those mechanisms are necessary.
Yes, but I do think a comment, as Michelle mentioned, about the vagaries of tax credits is in order.
Okay.
I'd also hope that we would make clear our intent that this is to provide low income
Right.
housing and not affordable housing.
Ah,
Because in Charlottesville, affordable housing is not affordable to normal people.
that's right.
Pat, that should be in the comments.
Yeah.
That it should
Okay. I will go back and
put in low
review
income.
the video for these comments. So
Okay.
this is helpful.
Okay.
Okay. Let's go to question 4. Taking into consideration the Dillon rule, the state should grant all localities in Virginia the right to adopt mandatory inclusionary zoning ordinances and impact fees for affordable housing.
Apple pie.
Yeah, again.
That is the question that I believe Sally Hudson's was referring to in her bill. This is what she wants. And at this point in time, there's not a carte blanche, has not been extended to the Charlottesville area, but a temporary grant has been given to the Charlottesville area to experiment with this. That's
So,
all, that's all I can say.
I don't want to be criticizing or commenting on Sally Hudson's bill because I'm not sure what it is.
Uh-huh.
But it's my understanding that the bill that was passed for mandatory inclusionary zoning is allowing any locality in the state to pass their mandatory inclusionary zoning, including Charlottesville.
Uh-huh.
So the only enabling legislation that is required now related to this is for the mandatory impact fee for affordable housing. That needs enabling legislation. So I'm not sure if I'm, you know, I don't,
Okay, okay.
you know, but anyway, the whole point of this is why not give localities the authority, right, to do these things? So, well, the first now is allowed, but why not give a locality make their own decision-making authority to pass a mandatory impact fee for affordable housing if they want to? I mean, you know, why
Exactly.
should the state, you know, deny that?
Does anyone disagree?
Well, I'm ambivalent about the impact fees, mainly because I know, and I've never lived in the county, but the county's gone round and round on impact fees for various other things. And if I remember, there was some legislation that didn't allow them to do impact fees for certain types of things. Where is Sally when I need her?
Yeah.
Well, but wouldn't you say that they, if Charlottesville wanted to, you know, or Albemarle wanted to impose an impact fee for affordable housing, you know, you could always, if you disagree with it, you could, you know, voice your disagreement.
Sure.
Shouldn't they have the ability to pass it if they want to?
I'm inclined to agree with that.
Yes.
That's what this is about, really. That's, you know, it's because of the Dillon rule.
But if you're going to get rid of the Dillon rule, you're dreaming.
Yeah, well, no, and we're not saying that.
We're just getting rid of it piece by piece.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
We had better luck maybe with this GA than other times, but
Do we have anyone who disagrees with this at this
I'm not
point?
agreeing or disagreeing. I'm just not comfortable making a decision either way. I'm just not going to. I've got to study this more. This is just too much information for me to
Okay.
digest.
So on question number 4, we do not have a consensus. and
Oh, I think we got to get more people chiming in here.
Because I mean, that's just me.
A consensus is not just because one person disagrees.
Right.
That does not obviate the consensus.
Right.
A consensus, it's got to be much clearer that there are more people who either can't make a decision or disagree with one or the other of the decision. Consensus is you
I
got to
agree
get
on number
feedback
4.
from more people than just Bobby and me.
Sue, I would like to defer to your guidance through this question process on consensus because it is not my strong suit and you have more experience with this.
Yeah, I do have a lot of experience with consensus, and as do several others that I'm looking at, like Michelle and Francis.
Okay.
Yeah, if it looks like the body is pretty divided, you have no consensus. That's the thing.
Right.
If almost everybody agrees, and we don't actually count, but if you get a feel from the body, if nobody else is chiming in, one assumes they're agreeing with the people who have spoken.
I agree with that.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
After 57 years in the league.
Right. And the fact that, you know, we do like, as in Karen's situation on that one question, we do like to put those things in comments. But the consensus was that that she was the only one that was truly disagreeing. Bobby's got issues with not really understanding all of it, and she's not able to make a decision, but she's just one person that said that. If everybody else, if the bulk of the people that are on this Zoom say, I can't make a decision, then we have no consensus. But unless somebody says, I'm perfectly willing to say, I agree with question number 4. And any comments that were made about question 4 should go in the comment section, but lacking a bunch of people saying, I don't agree, or the fact that you can't make up your mind isn't necessarily no consensus.
Right. I
Thank
agree
you.
with all of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
That-
Elizabeth.
That helps me a lot. I appreciate that. Should we move on to question 5, everyone?
Yeah.
State laws should provide more tenant protections, including extended pay or quit periods or mandatory grace periods. Do we have anyone who disagrees with that?
Agree with that.
Yes, I disagree a little bit, and I'm writing it in the chat why I disagree with it. So I agree with number 5. Only if there is a mechanism for compensating landlords. And this was what I talked about during Alice's presentation. This was my question to her. So I do agree, but I'm concerned that the way it's written, of course I agree, because I don't think people should be evicted, okay? But if there's got to be a mechanism to make sure that the landlords are compensated. And so that's my problem with number 5.
Well,
She
oh,
said,
I
yeah.
shouldn't comment. I should let Alice comment on it.
Well, yeah, and Alice did speak to that. She said, basically, she said there is a mechanism, right, Alice? I mean,
Yes.
that was,
Well,
but
guess I'd
it's
say-
not mentioned in the number.
No,
5
because it's
question.
not really, it's not really appropriate to, to say that there has to be, a caveat to it. I mean, when you pass laws like this, you don't have those kind of caveats, but what you do have is making sure that there are robust prevention programs so that, landlords can get, or tenants can go and get help that they need to pay their rent. So that's in effect what it is. Nobody
Okay, but I'll
would
also,
ever pass a law
Yeah.
that's going to say, okay, we're going to extend the pay or quit, but only if you have a prevention law. I mean, it's just that's not gonna sail.
well, it would be crucial to understand it because there's actually a federal law, and Sue, you might know what this law is, but I know that there's a federal law that says that you cannot take something from someone without compensating for it.
Well,
Do you know about that, Sue? There's a
that's in every state has those kind of laws, the taking laws, but that's very rarely applied to an individual tenant landlord controversy. That's when the state is taking something from you. It's not an individual taking. It's only those taking laws apply only to the state.
Oh, the fed. Oh, I see. Like if they want to.
If for
Build
eminent domain, or they want to take this piece of property because they want to build a.
Right. So I
Okay.
do. I just have to say I'm not convinced at this point. I really agree with number 5. I mean, of course I wouldn't want to evict people, but on the other hand, I just can't fully agree with it without mentioning that you have to compensate the landlords.
Again, Pat and and Beth and Sue, it would be agree with that comment as a stipulation to the agreement.
Well,
Okay,
yeah, I was actually wondering if there was a way to reword that question to include landlord protections. But I'm willing to agree with strong comment.
okay.
Mhm.
We can do that.
I would agree with it. I also think that asking the study committee and the state board to consider adding that to the position that they eventually develop as the result of consensus would be a recommendation from our league.
I'm all in favor of that.
Okay, we can do that. I will put that in the formal,
Your brother goes to buy ice cream.
yeah, anyway. This is one time where having this recorded will really help me. Thank you very much. Question number 6. State laws should mitigate the impact of evictions by limiting late fees. Agree, disagree, or no consensus?
Again, that's already a law. So that just passed. And the reason we're just including it is to make sure it doesn't get undone.
Okay. Does anybody disagree? All right. And then the next one says state laws should mitigate the impact of evictions by expunging eviction records if the case is dismissed.
Oh, if the
That-
case,
It,
Well,
that's a state law now too.
Oh, good. That's
Okay.
wonderful news. Okay. Michelle, is there a question after 6? No, that's it.
That's it.
That's it.
And I just would like to make a statement on those things. Some of these look like, apple pie. Well, yeah, duh. but part of it is, and the study committee has done a wonderful job of putting things in so that laws that are on the books can't be taken away. And I think that's something that we forget. We're not necessarily always writing new laws here, but we're also protecting the things that are already on the books. I just wanted to say to Alice that I've been impressed with how this study went.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is certainly add to our armamentarium when advocating for affordable housing bills that are coming, and gives us some language to use to effectively lobby. And Alice, this was just terrific, and you were extremely adept at
amazing, complicated.
shortening this thing for all of us today. So
You're welcome. I'm going to have to run, you guys, but
thank you.
thanks for
Thank
asking.
you very much.
Thank you.
Hopefully
Yes,
see you guys in the future.
All right. Thanks, Alice.
Mhm.
Yes. Bye.
Any other comments, folks? This was
I
it.
I wanted to say one thing quickly at the end, and I just wrote it in a thank you, and I don't know if she saw it, but how much so often issues are intertwined. And I really like the way, I think it was at the beginning of the study that she talked about that.
Yeah.
She talked about how if children are homeless, then they're not going to do well in school. And there was a section at the beginning where she addressed how affordable housing was intertwined with so many other issues. And I really like the way she did that. And I think, I just want to acknowledge that issue about how it is so intertwined with these other issues.
Truly, truly. It's an enormous issue. It's enormously complex. And I'm really grateful to Alice and all of you for attending today's session. And I will go through and re-watch the discussion on these questions. And I will draft a response to send, but I will send it to you for your approval first in case you would like me to add to it, if that's okay.
Will the board approve it on the meeting next week? Because I mean, we have a deadline for the end of
Yeah.
October, don't we?
Yeah.
So, and the consensus to a state question comes from the board. So the board will look
Oh,
at all
okay.
of,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
you asked me to talk about consensus.
Thank you. Thank you.
But consensus comes from the board to the state.
Okay.
And it comes to the board by meetings like this. So you have to distill what was said here and bring it to the board, and the board will hopefully approve it.
All right. My homework is there for me to do tomorrow. And I thank you all for your cogent input. And I'm going to say adieu for the day.
Yeah, I'm gonna go take a nap. I've had a hard day.
I'm going to my birthday party.
Oh,
Ooh,
Happy birthday.
happy birthday.
Happy
Thank you.
birthday.
All right. See you later, everybody.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Take care. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Pat.
Thank you. See you all.